I don't think he necessarily is wanting to get rich just to get rich. I think has enough money. Like, he's worth $1.5 billion. He doesn't really need to do anything anymore anyway, but I think he really enjoys it. I think I think it energizes him. I would look at it the same way you look at any billionaire. I mean, why does Elon Musk keep going? Why didn't he just stop after PayPal? Like, why did he keep going? And I think there's something else that drives him. And I think it's the same with Jay. I think he's more interested in how can he do interesting things. Something like buying an NFL team. I mean, I think that's definitely in his sights. That's about so much more than making money through football. It's having a seat at the table, becoming the first Black owner of an NFL football team. I think that's something that's become a lot more important to him in recent years as he starts to think a little more about his legacy.
All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Zack here with me. I wanted to talk to him because, as many of you know, I'm very interested in the hip hop culture and its intersection with business. And I was gifted a book, Empire State of Mind, How Jay-Z Went from Street Corner to Corner Office. This is the Billionaire edition, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And so, Zack, I thought a great place to start was you've covered music for a long time. You've written about, all of the top musicians, some profiles. You've written all this stuff about investing in business. Why did you want to write a full book about Jay-Z and kind of his exploits into the business world?
Well, I think the short answer is he's the best example of exactly that, right? I mean, if you were to take any musician in the world, in the history of the world, who has a business acumen, and you were to rank them, I think it would be, you have a hard time finding anybody who would not put Jay-Z number one. Actually it turned out rather fortuitously, though, because when I first started writing this book, it was because I got a deal from Penguin when I was 25 years old. I just got a cold email from an editor over there, and she said, "Hey, I've read your stuff in Forbes. Do you want to write a book about Jay-Z or maybe Diddy?" And I said, sign me up. And basically, it went like that. I think sort of right place, right time. But I was doing the right thing too, which was writing about the business of hip hop for Forbes, and I had just started putting out what was then the beginning of my annual tradition, Hip Hop Cash Kings, the highest earning rappers of the year. And, Jay-Z was routinely on the top. When the first one came out, it was Jay-Z, Diddy, and 50 Cent at the top. They actually did a remix of the song I Get Money called the Forbes 1, 2, 3. And, that kind of kicked off my career writing about the business of hip hop. So, I think Diddy is definitely up there in terms of business acumen, but, Diddy's almost like somebody who, it was almost like if Richard Branson had a sideline as a rapper, it's just kind of like ancillary, like the rapping is ancillary to his business career. He's so plainly focused on the business. And, Jay-Z really, I mean, you could also put him up there with any artist in terms of number one albums. I think he's got more number one albums than any solo artist in the history of the world. He's only behind the Beatles in terms of, musical acts. So the way that he was able to take that musical energy and parlay it into the business world is just second to none. And I think, I think what's been really cool is watching over the past, decade since then, seeing how he's evolved. Even after he had gotten to this lofty place, he's continued to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I revise the book every couple of years. So, most recently the Billionaire edition, which was about a year ago.
So what's fascinating about this is you put the subtitle of the book, How Jay-Z Went from Street Corner to Corner Office. And in a recent song that DJ Khaled put out, God Did, he says the following. He says, "Judge it how you judge it. Say we going corporate. Nah, we just corner boys with the corner office," which I'm not going to say that he took that from the book and then put it into the song, but it's very much a theme of his life. And one of the big takeaways that I had from the book, it was literally one of the first big ideas I took out, was this: evolution is the mark of every great success. And he started out selling drugs, but now has transformed himself into this, huge businessman. What do you think drove that? Was it kind of the street credibility and the street mentality that made him successful? Was he always going to be successful without the music? Like, kind of unpack a little bit as to why is he the one who was able to do this out of all of the thousands of rappers over the last 30 years that didn't achieve the same amount of success that Jay-Z had?
Yeah, I mean, Jay-Z above all is very honest in his lyrics, which is, I think, kind of unusual. A lot of people brag, a lot of people, bluff. But if you go through his, you find a lot of sort of instances where, when you check the facts, like it's actually true. Whatever he is boasting in a lot of his songs, but the boasts that he makes are often true. So, I think he would say, and he has said in many ways, he was lucky because a lot of his peers are dead or in jail. And I think that's why he's focused a lot on criminal justice reform, that kind of stuff. He recognizes that he could have been a statistic. We had a few near-death experiences, kind of like in and out with the law, never really got in trouble for anything. I mean, he's had legal issues in the past, but, never did any serious time or anything like that. But I think there's that element. There's the lucky and good, right? And the good is, I think first and foremost, he has this incredible lyrical ability. In writing the book, there are stories in there where like Jay-Z has this reputation for he never writes down his rhymes. He keeps them all in his head. And there was this one guy I interviewed, a producer from the very early days who knew Jay. He knew this kind of reputation. He didn't believe it. He's like, who can keep all those songs in their head? So, he went into the studio with Jay, and Jay was just kind of goofing off with the guys. And, the studio time, they have an hour or two in the studio, the clock is ticking down, and producer's like, get with it, let's go. And so Jay-Z's like, all right. And he takes out this notepad, and he's sort of like, he's going like writing in the notepad, and this producer's like, oh man, he's totally full of it. Like he writes this stuff down. This is all just some myth that he's put out. And so, he goes and he spits his verse, very clean, leaves the studio on time. And so this producer's going to sort of clean up, and he walks into the recording booth, and there's the notepad, and Jay-Z left it, and he opens it up, and it's totally blank. So, I think he likes to mess with people in that way. And, there is really like a cinematic kind of aura to him. And, he likes to do things like that. So, right off the bat, to have these ideas that come out of his brain, and into songs is impressive enough, but to be able to just commit them to memory, you got to think that applies to other areas of his life and business as well. So, that's the creative side. On the business side, he just has this ability, in writing the book, people were talking about, he's a big chess player, but he's not thinking about, what's my next move. It's like, what's my next move after my next move after my next move after my next move. And, so you could take something like him getting a stake in the Nets, which happened, I think in 2003. And, if you kind of go through the course of his career, you can see these other little steps, and you're like, oh, that's what he was after, right? It's like, okay, he really wanted to move the Nets to Brooklyn and have equity in a franchise that was going to be worth more. Oh, wait, he wanted a piece of the new stadium, which is going to be more than just basketball. Oh, wait, he wanted to start his own sports agency because he saw the value in that. Oh, wait, now he's doing this stuff with the NFL. And suddenly you begin to realize that maybe getting a stake in the Nets, in 2003 or whatever it was, what he really wanted was to buy an NFL team in 20 years, right? And now we're starting to see that there are pieces being moved around where he might, he's been mentioned as a potential buyer for the Commanders along with Jeff Bezos, maybe then doing something together. So that's kind of how he operates. And, I think one of the fascinating things that is hard to know is, did he actually set out and say, like, I want to buy a football team in 20 years? Or was he just like, I have an idea of where I want to go, and if I keep doing things in that path, I'll get to some pretty interesting opportunities. So, but I think you'd have to have that. What is it? would you rather have $200,000 or lunch with Jay-Z? You know, you'd have to get that lunch with Jay-Z to really find the answer.
One of the things after reading so many books about so many different people that is a common theme, and it sounds so stupid, but they all work incredibly hard. They're all willing to take very big risks early on in their career. In this book in particular, you mentioned this idea that in the 1980s, he was willing to work for free to learn the craft. And what you wrote was, though Jay-Z today grosses millions per show, he spent 4 months in 1989 working the hip hop equivalent of an unpaid internship, rapping for room and board, which consisted of a spot on the tour bus floor and a free pass at the buffet. And what I took away from that is like, nobody thinks the guy who wants to buy an NFL team or owns an NBA team or, you know, has Rock Nation, like all these different things that were like, wow, Jay-Z literally was sleeping on the floor of a tour bus in the 1989 kind of summer and was literally learning the music business. And what did you kind of take away? Is the work ethic just stayed with him over the decades? And so it's like the same guy, it's just now he realizes how to use capital and how to use his connections and kind of business acumen? Or is maybe he slacking off now? Like, what's your read on him?
I would say slacking off. I think he's definitely just operating more quietly in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think that same ethos of sleeping on the floor and doing the unpaid internship, I mean, that has followed him through his entire career. So he, you know, that was a point in time where he was starting to have some success as a hustler, but, you know, his heart was in music. So he was really trying to make it work. And so he was on the tour with Big Daddy Kane. And I think maybe Digital Underground, and Tupac was around there. And, you know, so he was rubbing shoulders with some really interesting folks in those days. And, you know, but I think for him, it was all about like, let me learn this craft. Let me figure out how this business works. So that I can get out of the hustling game and do this thing that I'm really passionate about. And after a while, you know, in his early 20s, it didn't seem like it was going to work. So he was having so much more success as a hustler. It wasn't until he was 26 and a DJ named Clark Kent really convinced him, like, you have to give this one shot. You know, you have to put out one album and just see where it goes. And Jay-Z's plan was always to go back to being a hustler because he didn't think the economics worked in music. But when that first album came out and he started doing well, you know, I think he kind of revised his process. But that trait has remained, like, even as he worked his way through the music business. You know, one of the things that came up in doing my interviews for the book was everybody said Jay-Z just asked so many questions. You know, he was always wanting to accumulate more knowledge. You know, I liken it to a hermit crab. Like, he takes other bits of knowledge and adds it to his shell, you know, and then he kind of moves on to the next. So he absorbed everything he could from his early music mentors. And, you know, and within 10, 15 years, his mentors were like, you know, Warren Buffett and, you know, Bono. So he was able to kind of keep, you know, moving up and meeting, you know, more and more interesting people and absorbing everything he could from them. But, you know, again, that's the same kind of mechanic as doing the thing for free. Like, you're sitting there, you're accumulating knowledge, and you know, the value comes in what you do with it.
Yeah, one of the big takeaways I had from the book also was necessity is the mother of invention. And in the book, you write, with Jay-Z's debut album nearly complete, he and Damon Dash shopped it to all the major record labels, but there were no takers. And I think one of the stories that people have heard over time is like, own the equity, build your own thing, go direct, like all these themes that now kind of seem to rebubble up in society, especially in the tech world. They didn't necessarily want to do that. It's just they didn't have any other options. And then I thought it was pretty telling that they also named it Roc-A-Fella Records. And it always, I think, growing up, I was like, does that have to do anything with like John Rockefeller, or is that just like, you know, similar named? But you really call out and you say that no, they absolutely, that's what they wanted to do, is they wanted to name it after the world's first billionaire, and they wanted to evoke images of the Rockefeller family's enduring dynasty, which tells me that they really were thinking quite big even early on when no one else believed in what they were doing.
Totally. I would also say it's a triple entendre. It's, you know, rock, like, I'll rock you, like Roc-A-Fella, a fellow, you know. Then I would also say it's a reference to the Rockefeller drug laws. You know, there's a certain irony that that some of the money they came in with was from sort of skirting the laws of, you know, the Rockefeller drug laws, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I think above all, like you say, it's the dynasty element, and dynasty is a word that Jay-Z used a lot. it's interesting though, like Jay-Z as this huge proponent of equity, getting skin in the game, that sort of thing. Yeah, he was shopping that record. He wanted to get a deal from one of the majors, but I think they were all too freaked out. I mean, this was in the mid 90s, and this was, when things were getting pretty violent with the East Coast, West Coast thing. And there was, all the parental advisory wars and Tipper Gore and all that stuff, so there was definitely like a concern around the subject matter. And on top of that, if you go back to Jay-Z's first album, it's very, it's like kind of inaccessible, like very rapid fire lyrics. There's no dumbing down, slowing down. I mean, it's 26 years of his life packed into one album, with this sort of rapid fire flow and these like deeply layered references and, like a lot of hustler slang and sort of like obscure references, a lot of film reference, stuff like that. So I think people didn't really think that it would sell. And in fact, I think, ultimately is one of his worst selling albums, but it did, it did eventually go platinum. And when they went out with it independently, it did extremely well, sold a couple 100,000 copies. And obviously the economics are a lot better than they are on a record deal. So, by virtue of getting iced out from the major, music labels, they were able to have ownership. And that's a theme that kind of like is pervasive throughout hip hop. And I think that's why hip hop as a genre, the most successful artists are obsessed with equity, because whether it's, Puffy starting his own clothing line, or Jay-Z starting his own record label, they found that, they weren't necessarily going to get the kind of endorsement deals that they thought were fair. So they could start their own things and create more value that way. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really sort of underreported, the fact that, like Jay-Z and Damon Dash went to this Italian sportswear company called Iceberg that they really liked and occasionally rapped about. And, they wanted an endorsement deal. And the executives basically like, oh, we'll give you some T-shirts, and that's when they kind of decided to go start their own. And I think Jay-Z more than anybody has mastered the art of, if I'm going to rap about a type of brand rather than rapping about an established brand that I'm not getting paid by or that I'm not owning, I'm going to start my own. So whether it's clothing line or a record label, or later a champagne brand, a cognac, that kind of thing, it's almost like he's spun up this entire empire of things that he can rap about, so that he can kind of benefit off of the free publicity rather than somebody else.
So along these lines, there's a number of controversies. I think there's watches, there's champagne, there's multiple things that he rapped about, and people are like, there's no way he's rapping about that without getting paid, but the company or him deny that there's a relationship. Break down, like, what's your read in terms of, is everything he's rapping about likely he's got some sort of ownership directly or indirectly? Are there things that potentially he just likes and doesn't have a relationship? Like, that was kind of a theme in the book, where it seemed like people had questions, but there weren't necessarily always answers from the companies or from him. Hey guys, what's going on? I hope that you're enjoying this conversation, but I wanted to interrupt for a quick second and tell you about a brand new conference that I'm hosting on March 4th at the Miami Beach Convention Center. The event is called LYCEUM Miami, and tickets are completely free for anyone who wants to come. I'm bringing together many of the most popular guests from the podcast over the last couple of years. Some of the guest speakers that we've already announced are people like Vivek Ramaswamy from Strive Asset Management, or Delian and Mike Solana from Founders Fund, Chris Williamson from the Modern Wisdom podcast, Cody Sanchez from Contrarian Thinking, and Billionaire Christian Augermeyer, among many others. I've got a number of amazing surprise guests as well, some that you definitely will not expect, and others that come from walks of life that you will be scratching your head as to how I even got them to show up. But come check out LYCEUM Miami on March 4th. The LYCEUM was a public gym in Athens, Greece, where people used to come together, talk about ideas, and debate topics that were important to society. I want to meet people in person, in real life, once again after 3 years of a hiatus from real life events. And so I'm hosting the event. And as I mentioned, anyone from anywhere can come to this event completely for free. All you need to do is go to LYCEUMmiami.com and you'll be able to pick up a free general admission ticket. Make sure you claim your ticket in order to get in through the doors. LYCEUM Miami is going to be a great time. So come check it out. Come hang out with me, many of the popular guests from the podcast, and other like-minded individuals. LYCEUM Miami, March 4th, Miami Beach Convention Center. I hope to see you there. All right, let's get back into this conversation.
Yeah, I think that he couldn't possibly own every single thing that he raps about, right? It would be, I mean, you'd have to have trillions of dollars probably to own every company that puts out the products that he raps about. But, certainly in key categories, he's accumulated more and more of them. And I think, as you allude to, the champagne is a really interesting example of one. So, that was a story that I followed in writing the book. And, I don't know, after years of being a business reporter, you start to get a sixth sense for, that something doesn't smell right about this. And I just remember watching the video for Show Me What You Got in, I think it was off Kingdom Come. So maybe it was 2008, I want to say 2007, 2008, something like that. And I saw these, he's got these gold bottles. He's rapping about the Ace of Spades champagne. I'm like, there's no way that he doesn't have some kind of interest in this company. So as I was writing the book, I kept kind of poking around and, nothing was really coming up. And, but then I found myself up at Harlem in this speakeasy that used to be owned by a guy named Branson Belchi, who was a legendary hustler, was sort of the guy who brought fine champagne to hip hop. He also happened to be Biggie's weed man. He was the provider of the highest quality bud to all the biggest rap stars, especially in New York, where it's hard to find that stuff. And, you wanted that, what was it? It was Acapulco Gold or Chunky Black or whatever it was. You had all these strains and, Branson would come through. And so he was sort of like the sommelier of weed. And, but then he would bring along a bottle of Tattinger or Cristal or something like that, and drink it with the guys. And that he was sort of like the Pied Piper of fine champagne as well. And, I got to be really close with them. And so, we're sitting in his speakeasy and I'm telling him about my dilemma. I'm like, what do you think about this champagne situation? And he's like, well, I've got this bottle of antique gold, and he brings it over, and it's this gold bottle. It's the same as the Armand de Brignac Ace of Spades champagne that Jay-Z's rapping about, and that's selling for $300. And he's like, this antique gold, you can only get it in Europe, but it was $60 a bottle, and looks pretty similar to me. So basically, I ran into a wall, and I couldn't get any more answers other than these kind of theories. So I just went to France. I arranged an interview at the Cartier Champagne headquarters, and they took me on this grand tour. And we went down into the cellars, 100 feet under the ground, and there in these racks were these gleaming gold bottles of champagne. They didn't have any markings on them. And this is the same company that makes antique gold, which I think stopped being produced in 2006. Armand de Brignac started up in 2007 or whatever it was. And then that's what it was. The video of Jay-Z, holding these gold bottles, happened in between. So, I asked these characters hey, how did Jay-Z start to be interested in your champagne? And he found it in a mom and pop shop in New York, and just really liked the taste, and so he decided to rap about it, and that was it. So I went back to New York. I did a little more digging, and I confirmed my dates, and so I wrote them back, and I said, how did he get the bottle into his video if it wasn't out when the video came out? How did he find it in a mom and pop shop? And they said, okay, well, we do have a relationship with him, blah, blah, blah. And so the book kind of, exposed sounds very dramatic, because it's not like he was doing anything wrong. He was just kind of trying to have a champagne and drink it too, right? He wanted to seem like a tastemaker, just kind of recommending something nice, and he also wanted to get paid. So I kind of blew the doors off of that, and there was a little kerfuffle and there was some controversy over it, and but then 2 years later he announced that he had bought the whole thing, and it kind of I think validated my reporting, and that he had already had a piece in it, and so forth. So he talked about Jay-Z being honest. In one of his songs a couple of years ago, he said that his champagne company is worth $500 million. And then I think the next year he sold half of it to Louis Vuitton for, I think it was 250 million or 300 or something like that. So LVMH now is the JV partner on Armand de Brignac Ace of Spades champagne. And it's kind of like Jay-Z's focus on equity has come full circle. He bought into this brand, he built it up, and then he kind of like sold half of it back to a big conglomerate to try to help expand it and to help fund it. So a little bit of a revision on the equity theory. Better to own, but also better to have a really big corporate partner who can help with the bills when something gets that big.
What's funny is it almost feels like he was flipping products and brands, even Roc Nation to some degree, right? Is like this, he was able to go into Def Jam and kind of eventually flip that a couple of times into what became Roc Nation through a number of different business deals. The champagne, he was able to kind of partner with somebody who was maybe not as well known or not as globally dominant. He's then able to kind of make a couple of deals and then flip it eventually to LVMH. It reminds me a lot of like what happens on the street, right? And kind of understanding how to take products and work with different people and things like that. Is that a theme of what he's been doing? Is basically being able to gain control of certain assets, grow them, and then understanding that, look, if you're going to have a partner, having LVMH as a partner is a pretty damn good partner to have. And in some way, actually having them involved puts him even further on a pedestal, puts him even further, in terms of the validation of the tastemaker, of the brand, of like who I think society thinks Jay-Z is now. Is that part of the strategy as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is this element of his career that sort of reminds me of, you hear about in business school, sometimes there'll be a challenge like take this paper clip and turn it into a car by the end of the semester, and it's you trade the paper clip for like, I don't know, a baseball card, you trade the baseball card for a CD, you trade, and suddenly you have a Volkswagen within a few months if you keep getting a little bit more with each deal. And I really do think that's how he operates. But part of it is that he can provide his own value to anything he buys. And it's sort of like when Warren Buffett buys Coca-Cola stock and the word comes out, then the stock goes up. If Jay-Z buys a champagne company, it's immediately worth more than what it was before he bought it, simply by virtue of the fact that it is Jay-Z who bought it, and people are more likely to consume it. So you can really pursue a very lucrative strategy that way if you keep buying things, and then as long as you get a reasonable deal and you don't overpay, they're immediately worth more. You invest more time and effort into them, they're worth even more than that, and then you sell them or you sell half of them, and it's a lot better strategy, say, than just taking a few $1,000,000 for an endorsement deal.
One of the most ambitious things that you highlight in the book is this idea of Jay-Z Blue. And whether it was him or somebody on his team came up with the idea of like, let's create a color. They work with a well-known artist to create the color. They basically protect the intellectual property. And then it sounds like they basically went to a bunch of companies and were like, hey, we have this color. Why don't you put Jay-Z Blue on, I think it was a Jeep or a car. And it sounds like they got close to actually launching it. And then the automotive company backed away because they actually were scared that Jay-Z Blue as a color and him as a person may overshadow the release of the new car, which seems kind of crazy. Like, what was your takeaway in terms of the ambition and maybe even arrogance of like, we're going to create a color and then we're going to go put this on all these things and we'll make money that way?
Yeah, this was sort of like, the early to mid aughts auto industry, right? U.S. auto industry, kind of flirting with the future, but like woefully out of touch, headed for, catastrophe during the Great Recession, right? And so, I think at the time people realized that hip hop was a big deal. They kind of thought it might be a fad, but they wanted to, interact with it perhaps if it could be advantageous to them. They were a little freaked out still about, the associations with violence, that kind of thing. But yeah, so there was a deal that seemed to be heading toward completion, where Chrysler was going to create a Jay-Z Jeep painted Jay-Z blue. It was going to come preloaded with every song he'd ever written, and buttercream leather interiors and 22-inch chromies and the whole thing. He was scheduled to fly to Detroit to finalize the deal, and at the last minute, it got kiboshed, got canceled. And from my reporting, what I understood was that some higher up got freaked out about his past as a drug dealer, and that that could kind of, yeah, like you said, I think that was exactly it. That this was going to be the Jeep Commander, and I think they were worried that it was going to be more about the Jay-Z Jeep than it was about the Jeep Commander, which was their new flagship ultra luxury big SUV. So yeah, I mean that sort of thinking is how Detroit, kind of almost went bankrupt. I mean, I guess it did, some of the companies had to be bailed out, that kind of thing. So, but there's an interesting lesson here too. I think, to go back to Warren Buffett, he has this quote, better to get a new boat than to keep patching a leaky one, something like that. And, I think Jay-Z was like, well, I'm not going to concern myself. Like, this industry isn't ready for me. I'm not going to waste my time anymore. I'm going to move on to other things. And, and that's really what he did. Jay-Z also didn't really talk about it, and this was one of the things that I dug up in my reporting. And, I think that with him, he has this aura of invincibility, right? I mean, he's married to Beyonce. He's a billionaire. Like, he's got everything's going right for him. And he mostly, up until really a few years ago, only rapped about the things that were going right to kind of underscore this image that he had. But I think as an entrepreneur, you go through things. I mean, you probably have more things that don't work out than things that do work out. I mean, if you think about a VC, right? I mean, if you get 1 out of 10 investments that really hits, then you're a great VC. But you're not going to talk about the other ones maybe so much. So I think with Jay, that it's important to realize that he has had his failures, like any entrepreneur, and it's more about what you learn from the failures. In a way, it's more interesting than what you learn from the successes, because once, you combine all of the lessons from all those failures, you could set yourself up for that greater success. And that's certainly what he did.
Another part of the book hits on something that I always talk about, which is like the person you marry is one of the most important decisions of your life. But I'm usually talking about it from like a happiness standpoint and kind of just like enjoyment of people's lives. But you have 2 excerpts that I want to read real quickly. The first is, in terms of the entertainment industry, it's the biggest merger, Jay-Z and Beyonce, you could possibly imagine. It's 2 superpowers coming together. It's sort of Microsoft and Apple deciding they can literally be in bed together, which came, that's a quote from music historian Jeff Chang. And then you've got another part here where Jay-Z talks about it, and he says, we exchanged audiences. Her records are huge, top 40 records. And she helped Bonnie and Clyde go to #1. What I gave her was a street credibility, a different edge. How intentional was this versus like, no, they just fell in love, and then there was a bunch of, positive byproducts that came out of it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are definitely sort of arranged marriages in the entertainment industry, and you get the sense that some things are done just for convenience and not for love, and maybe that there's no real relationship there. But I do get the sense that Jay-Z and Beyonce have an actual relationship, and at this point they've been together for so long. It's like, you see celebrity marriages dissolve. By this point, if there's not something real happening there. At the same time, yeah, it's a great there's a great synergy professionally. And I think that the thing that he was talking about in that quote, that was true when they got married in the late aughts. And, when I wrote my book, when I first started writing it, they'd only been married for a year or two. And I just remember some people were still like, oh, right, Beyonce's husband. I mean, she was so much bigger than him in terms of overall celebrity and, still is, I'd say. But Jay-Z was not a household name sort of in the international business scene when they got married in the same way he is now. And I think that, certainly musically, yeah, she had more of a pop audience. There's a lot of synergies there. He had more of a hip hop audience. So like some of them came over and listened to his stuff, and some of his audience, like he gave her credibility, like a street cred that she maybe didn't have before. But I think the big lesson is on the business side, right? The fact that Jay-Z was connected to this superstar who is palatable to like Pepsi, right? To some of the biggest, most mainstream brands in the world, in a way softened his image. And I mean that in sort of like the best possible way, right? Like earlier in his career, there were deals that he wasn't getting because of his past, whether it was the Jay-Z Jeep deal or some of the record deals early on. But, I think if Jay-Z had been married to Beyonce at the time that the Jay-Z Jeep thing had been going on, there wouldn't have been that question. It's like, oh, he's married to Beyonce. She's wholesome. She, we can get behind that. So I think that it sort of helped corporate America warm up to Jay-Z a little bit. And, for her, it brought all that horsepower of his sort of business management style, of his sort of entrepreneurial style to her empire. And, she started getting paid, she sings about getting paid in equity for doing a show, a private gig, I think for Uber, stuff like that. That wasn't going to be happening, prior to Jay-Z. So I would say more than the musical synergies, the business synergies have been, incredibly huge. And they kind of have a great, you talk about a 2-income household, right? They get their money in really different sort of ways. I mean, she can go out and tour and gross $300 million in a year. He can't do that. What he can do is he can invest it and build value, build equity. And he can have these giant assets that are appreciating, but she can go out and get the cash. So I think that's a nice combo, especially when you have, I think he has a $50 million mortgage or something. They bought an $88 million mansion a couple of years ago, and they took out this mortgage. It was still, I think it was still 3%. So he figured he could earn a greater return than that. But you got to have somebody, bringing it in actively while you're investing it, and that's what she does.
Why do you say that he couldn't go tour and bring in 300 million? Like, what do you think the number would be if he did a similar type tour?
He could do arenas. I mean, he can sell out an arena, gross, a little over $1 million a night, but she could sell out a stadium and gross, $5 million a night. And so if you were to go, I mean, if you just do like the quick math on that, yeah, I mean, I guess if he really wanted to do a 2-year tour and go around the world and play every day, like, could he gross $1 million in a year? Sure. But just the time and effort required, what he would have to do versus what she can do. If you can fit four times as many people into a building, to pay for to pay the same amount of money to see your same show, the scale obviously is just much greater. So I think still, as big as he is, he's not a pop star. And even when you see him do arenas, it's always like he'll do it with Beyonce or he'll do it with Justin Timberlake, something like that, because he just doesn't have the I mean, I don't know that there are any hip hop acts other than maybe Drake who could sell out a stadium by themselves. And Beyonce just has such a larger audience. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating that people who are into hip hop and rap, they forget it's still pretty small compared to the pop audience. But another theme that you have in the book is that he actually spends less and less time with rappers, and he starts spending more and more time with various billionaires. And some of them that you mentioned are Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Michael Bloomberg, Mikhail Prokop, Oprah Winfrey, and many others. Is that an intentional thing? Is that just like your interest becomes in business, and so you just naturally gravitate towards the people who have kind of figured that out and mastered it, and so you want to learn from them? Like, what do you think is driving such a different set of friends as he got older?
I think it's kind of about, what's your reality? Like, what are your, what are your problems? What are your hopes and dreams? And you want to spend time with people who are like having some of those same concerns occupying their mind, right? And he just he got to a place where he was one of one, right, in hip hop. I mean, you could argue, Diddy, or to some extent Nas, maybe Drake, but I mean, he's, what does he have in common with some 19-year-old who just signed a record deal and is rapping about like money phone? I don't know. You know what I mean? So I think for him, it was just, those are the circles that he ran in, and it kind of happened naturally. I think at first there was an element where, he was trying to always be almost like he was almost trying to be the poorest person in the room, the least successful person in the room. And that the more time he spent with people who were more successful than him, the more he could learn their kind of secrets and tricks of the trade. So I think that kind of happened naturally. But then, once you're in that rarefied sort of air, you start getting invited to things. You're going to the Met Gala, and you're going to the White House and all that stuff. And it's just, that's who's there. So I kind of think it was natural evolution as he became more successful.
Where do you think he's going? What's like the end game here? Is it just bigger and bigger deals, kind of be the guy who becomes the richest, hip hop artist of all time? Is it to be a multi-billionaire? Is it to give it all away? Like, what do you think kind of is the end game for him?
I don't think he necessarily is wanting to get rich just to get rich. I think has enough money, like, he's worth $1.5 billion. He doesn't really need to do anything anymore anyway, but I think he really enjoys it. I think it energizes him. And, I would look at it the same way you look at any billionaire. I mean, why does Elon Musk keep going? Why did he leave after, why didn't he just stop after PayPal? Like, why did he keep going? And I think there's something else that drives him. And I think it's the same with Jay, and whether, I don't know that he would want to give it all away. Certainly in his lifetime. I think he's more interested in how can he do interesting things, how can he keep building and building, and in the process, how can he have an impact, like something like buying an NFL team. I mean, I think that's definitely in his sights, and that's about so much more than just having the credibility and making money through football. It's having the seat at the table, becoming the first Black owner of an NFL football team, having an impact just by being there, just by virtue of who you are. And I think that's something that's become a lot more important to him in recent years as he starts to think a little more about his legacy.
And when you think about kind of in hindsight, his biggest mistake and his biggest good decision or biggest success, what would you put in each one of those categories?
Oh, it's a great question. Biggest mistake. It's the. I think there's an element where he took a little longer than he might have to really open up about some of his failures. And I think that could have been really valuable a little earlier in his career. And again, it wasn't really until he put out 444 a few years ago. And I think that album, what was that, That came out in 2020, 2018. I don't remember, 2018, something like that. A few years ago. Anyway, that was when it was sort of his apology album to Beyonce. He really kind of did some soul searching, that sort of thing. But he waited, I think, maybe a decade longer than he needed to show that vulnerability. And I think that that sort of thing can be so valuable to other people coming up. So, I don't know that monetarily it would have been any different, but if what he really wants to focus on now is a legacy, I think some of those lessons of getting deep into what didn't work are what are most valuable to people coming up. And I think, it would have been a service to start doing that a little earlier. As far as the biggest success, the best business decision, probably the whole Roc Nation apparatus. You could say the Champagne deal, but I guess we talked about that a lot already. I think what he's done with Roc Nation, which is taking the name Roc-A-Fella Records, right, and kind of, just Rockwear clothing line, finding his own name that kind of evokes the names of the things he's already sold, creating a new thing, getting Live Nation to fund it, to guarantee him tens of millions of dollars in funding every year for a thing that he still owns for this sort of multi-purpose entertainment company that he can kind of do whatever he wants with. I think that was a pretty remarkable decision. And, to get that sort of money, those sort of guarantees from a touring company, when, as we talked about a little earlier, like hip hop is just not on the scale of pop. When it comes to live music, recorded music, hip hop is the most consumed genre in the world, but live music is still a different story. To get that kind of a deal from a touring company, that's pretty remarkable. And, he re-upped it again recently. And, so I think that's, hard to top that.
You didn't just write a book about Jay-Z. You've also written a number of other books. And your most recent book was about A-list celebrities actually angel investing, something that Jay-Z has done multiple times. He's now raised multiple venture funds and kind of continues to move into the asset management space. But what are some of the takeaways just from celebrities, athletes, musicians, all starting to kind of follow in these footsteps?
Yeah, so the book is called A-List Angels. It came out in March 2020, at the same time as COVID, so not the best timing there. But it dug into this phenomenon, which I started to explore back in 2016. I wrote a Forbes cover story on Ashton Kutcher and Guy Oseary, his business partner, who's the manager of had been the manager of U2 and is the manager of Madonna and some other folks. And it kind of detailed how they got in, they invested early in Uber and Airbnb and some other companies, started their own venture fund. And the book really explores, not just that, but sort of the rise of the celebrity angel investor. And, what is it exactly that a celebrity gets out of the deal? What does the entrepreneur, what does a startup get out of the deal? And sort of why is this happening and why do we care? And, it's funny because you think about the rivalries in hip hop early on. Now both Jay-Z and Nas have their own venture funds, and that you can see them kind of tweaking each other a little bit, like in verse in some of their songs, like when they talk about how big their funds are, or the startups they invested in that were the most successful. Even when Jay-Z started his own fund, he called it MVP, Marcy Venture Partners, I think it stands for. And, that was after Nas had started Queensbridge Venture Partners. So, there's this sort of like funny little thing where, so Nas named his fund after the housing project where he grew up. Jay-Z named it after his, but his is like MVP, like he's the most valuable player. So there's a little bit of back and forth competition, I think, going on there. And it's interesting to see how it translates from the old days until now. But yeah, I think that's where, a lot of this energy has gone in terms of, the strategy of like, let's get equity, instead of just taking a cash deal. A lot of celebrities are like, okay, maybe I can get free equity in a startup. I can get some advisory shares, or maybe I can, by virtue of my celebrity status, I can get into an oversubscribed round for a startup that's sort of, there's no free lunch, but something that's, headed toward an IPO that's going to be a big deal, and some of the value that founders can get out of having celebrities on the cap table.
My last question for you is, who's the next one? Who do you, when you look out on the landscape, whether it's music, celebrity, who do you think has the potential, both from a notoriety, a branding, an aspiration or ambition, and then also just kind of surrounded with the right people to be able to pull off something like this, whether it's become a billionaire or kind of acquire many of the assets similar to Jay-Z? Who would you say is kind of next in line?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of interesting names out there. I kind of think the one I've got my eye on is Burner. He's the founder of Cookies, it's a huge cannabis brand. He's actually the third or fourth richest guy in hip hop right now. And I think as federal legalization becomes a real possibility, his empire is going to become ever more valuable, and already is doing fantastically well. I think more than anybody really realizes. But he's somebody who has that same kind of entrepreneurial energy, and can really dissect things and think 4 moves ahead. So I would keep an eye on Burner for sure.
So he's an interesting person for you to say, because he's released like 40 albums. My guess is that very large portion of the audience is not going to know who he is. And so he doesn't have nearly the kind of notoriety on the music side as somebody like a Jay-Z would. But really, is this also highlighting the fact that many of the people who kind of start with music, they may do that to build a little bit of momentum, maybe some cash flow, but ultimately they know the game is not music. The game is to get into business. And so they just use that as the launch pad, and they're going to care less and less about the success of their music career.
Absolutely. Although Burner, he's incredibly prolific. I mean, as you say, he's an insane quantity of albums that he puts out. It's just nonstop. So I don't think he needs to be releasing music that often, quite that often, to have an impact. But I think he really loves it. He cares about it, and it absolutely informs the success of his cannabis brand, his clothing line, stuff like that. So I do think that it's a conscious choice as well. The music dovetails with the main business. I think he's definitely taken lessons from Jay and them, and to see how that works. So, but I'm also interested to see, if Cookies down the line IPOs and he suddenly got a lot more cash on his hands, a lot more liquidity. What does he go and do with that? Is it just stuff in the cannabis space, or does he start investing in other things too? Does he start doing the Jay-Z thing? And I think that could be really, really interesting. And certainly, Cookies has a chance to be the Armand de Brignac of weed. It's probably already more valuable than Armand de Brignac. Maybe the better question is, could it become the I don't know, could it become the Veuve Clicquot of weed? It's like something that's a high end but very widely consumed brand. Could you start to get a massive scale? Could it even become the Budweiser of weed? And I think that, there's no sort of like clear cut number one brand out there where everybody knows that is the number one weed brand. But I think his is certainly in the running to do that once things really open up federally.
I think the reports are that he turned down $800 million for the company already. Now, I don't know if he owns 100% or has got investors or what, but obviously there's a number of investors who think it's quite valuable. And if you think, the federal kind of approval and the legalization of it at the federal level would put a big, kind of multiple on that, under the assumption that it happens.
Yeah, he owns about a third of the company still. He turned down that $800 million offer. The weed business has been sort of weird lately. There's been some, the way that it's been rolled out in different states, there's been oversupply in some states, which has encouraged like selling out the back door and shipping off to other states where it's not legal yet, because you can get a better deal sometimes. But, I think that kind of stuff is going to sort itself out. And I think one of the big issues is just something that's federally illegal, even if it's legal in the state, you have to do business in cash. You gotta have a lot of safeguards in place. You can't get financing in the same way. So, I think once it does go legal federally, which I think it will, within the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, yeah, he's going to be in a really great position too.
Awesome. Where can we send people to find you on the internet or find any of the books that you've written?
Yeah, my handle on all platforms is Zogblog, and you can find Empire State of Mind in wherever books are sold. I'd say friendly neighborhood bookstore. Go support your independent bookstore if you can, but you can get it wherever books are sold.
And as I mentioned at the beginning, Zack and I met because I read Empire State of Mind, how Jay-Z went from street corner to corner office. It is fantastic. Even if you're not into hip hop or rap, it is a great kind of overview of what has become, one of the least likely billionaires. If you go back to kind of where they started, but Jay-Z has done a fantastic job of kind of building his empire. And so it's the revised edition. There's a billionaire edition since he became billionaire. Highly suggest you go get it if you've not read it. And Zack, thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed talking, and something tells me that we could talk for hours and hours about every single one of the people in hip hop that seems to be moving into the business world and doing so at such a rapid pace.
Amen to that. Well, thanks for having me on, Pomp.